Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
Right now on ITV2, it's time for Totally Bonkers Guinness World Records.
When you think of ITV2, what springs to mind? Is it the never-ending barrage of reality-based programming? Is it the channel you regularly tune into for your fixes of Love Island, Big Brother and the like? No matter what your impression, it's safe to say that for the last 10 years, if not longer, ITV2 has been an important cornerstone for the other side, especially when it comes to reaching the ever-elusive target audience of 16 to 34-year-olds. With the rise of streaming and the breakaway from scheduled programming, ITV2 has done surprisingly well in both being able to adapt to the change in the way that content is consumed and still remain somewhat relevant in an ever-changing, ever-evolving television landscape. But what about when it first began? Would you believe me if I told you that ITV2 only stretches back to the year 1998? Surely it's been around longer than that, right? Don't you remember the many TVs of the 70s and 80s that purposely had an ITV2 button located on them? Well, despite only being around on our screens for just shy of 30 years, the road to ITV2's eventual launch is a lot longer and bumpier than you may have imagined. Since 1955 here in the UK, there were two major competitors in television broadcasting. The BBC, who had started up operations first in 1936, halted them during the Second World War, and then restarted shortly after in 1946. ITV would follow in the autumn of 1955, finally cracking the BBC's near 20-year monopoly on the growing television medium, and offering audiences something different, and also the relative novelty of commercial television. Whilst audiences did take to ITV and its offerings, critics and even members of government were not so impressed. Such was the perceived state of television that by the dawn of the 1960s, it was deemed that something had to be done. The Pilkington Report, as it became known, was seen as the ultimate document into critiquing broadcast television at the time and outlining where it progresses in the future. Both the BBC and ITV came off badly, although ITV arguably got the brunt of the criticism. One of the talking points of the report was regarding the introduction of a third television channel, one that would offer programmes unlike those on the existing two channels, ones that would be of a similar, if not greater quality. When it came to who would receive this third channel, the BBC would win out, launching BBC Two, rather shakily, in the spring of 1964.
Well, good evening, and as I said a few minutes ago, and I understand nobody could hear me, welcome to BBC Two, from where it all began, here in Studio A in Alexandra Palace.
ITV were frustrated at this, believing it gave their older competitor a further chance to extend their share of the viewership. Given though it would take some years for the majority of Brits to even have access to BBC Two, these fears were somewhat diminished. But in principle, if the BBC could have permission to operate a second channel, surely the same honour would befall ITV in the not too distant future. The 1970s were seen as something as a golden era for British television, classic programmes coming thick and fast from both broadcasters. It was a decade also marked via turbulence, with strike action dominating the later part of the 70s, forcing both the BBC and ITV off the air at various points, sometimes for months on end. By 1979, with the general election coming up, both leading political parties, the incumbent Labour and the Conservatives, promised in their manifestos that if elected, a fourth terrestrial television channel would be launched across Britain. Many viewers and ITV themselves hoped this would finally be the chance to realise the long-awaited ITV2. As mentioned, several televisions that had push buttons would often have one reserved for an ITV2, even though the channel wasn't a reality yet. Ultimately, the decision was taken in the Broadcasting Act of 1980 that a fourth channel would come about and indeed be a subsidiary of the Independent Broadcasting Authority, just as all the ITV franchises were. However, this new channel wouldn't go under any sort of ITV moniker. Instead, it would simply be known as Channel 4. However, a subscription would be levied out to all of the ITV companies for them to fund the new starter, on the proviso that said regional companies would be able to sell adverts to air in return, as television advertising back in the day could be a very lucrative earner. Channel 4 would launch in late 1982, and with the fourth channel now up and running, it seemed like the prospect of an ITV2 was now even less likely than before.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be able to say to you, welcome to Channel 4.
The irony also that many of those TVs that had ITV2 earmarked on them were now used to tune into Channel 4 in some cases. ITV would continue through the 80s under its regional franchise model that had been around since its inception. Although Channel 4 was somewhat an ally as a fellow commercial broadcaster and part of the IBA, ITV was still yet to have its own dedicated second channel, unlike the BBC, where BBC Two only continued to raise its accessibility and popularity amongst viewers. However, just like before, a new decade would bring about great change for the television industry.
Published the bill which will shape the future of British broadcasting. There'll be a fifth television channel and hundreds of new radio stations. It's the biggest shake-up in television and radio since ITV was set up in 1955.
The Broadcasting Act of 1990 is often seen as one of the most important pieces of legislation for the UK TV industry. Several sweeping changes were brought in, such as the BBC now needing to have at least 25% of its programmes produced by independent companies rather than it all be in-house. There was also the announcement of a fifth terrestrial television channel to be introduced. Was it now finally time for the ever-elusive ITV2 to make it to the airwaves? Well, no, it wasn't. Instead, the resultant newcomer would be Channel 5, which launched in the spring of 1997 with backing from the Spice Girls, no less.
It's the power of 5!
But despite missing out on the new opportunity in terrestrial television, ITV2 seemed like it could finally become a reality in the exciting new realm of digital television.
On digital, more than just television.
Marked as the future of the medium, the introduction of digital-based television was a slow and steady process. The first major inroads here in the UK would arise in the late 1990s, with On Digital becoming the first paid digital terrestrial television service, inviting viewers to jump into the digital world, which offered more channels, more interaction, and more value for money. With this new avenue opening up, more television channels could indeed start up, providing ITV with the ideal opportunity once and for all to get a second channel bearing their branding up and running. With the introduction of digital terrestrial television, each of the major broadcasters were allocated bandwidth for their existing services, with space for new channels as well. Given that ITV had largely abandoned its regional structures of old by the late 90s, the major players left, Granada, Carlton and United News and Media, were also the main shareholders in the On Digital service. In an attempt to keep pushing on to the public, trying to attract them away from their competitors over at Sky, the companies banded together to announce that a channel called ITV2 would finally launch and be broadcast in a uniform fashion across most of the ITV network in late 1998. After being nearly 40 years in the making, on the 7th of December 1998, the moment had finally arrived. At 7 PM that Monday night, ITV2 officially hit the airwaves as a free-to-air channel on digital terrestrial television.
10,
9,
8,
7,
6,
5,
4,
3,
2.
1! It Takes Two and ITV2 is on the air.
The marketing and build-up for this launch was quite something, utilising much of the ITV talent base and even some celebs of the day, including a very young pre-acting star, Billie Piper, who was riding high off several #1 hits at the time. She provides us with a cover of the 60s classic It Takes Two. Interesting how they chose a cover for this launch, considering how the Spice Girls launched Channel 5 with something original, although that never got pushed as a single. Maybe they thought a song that was already known might work better? Although again, Billie's version of It Takes Two, as far as I can tell, wasn't issued as a single. Strange. ITV2's launch night started with, as many channels do when they first broadcast, a preview programme titled It Takes Two. Well, what else were they going to call it? Presented by former sportspeople turned presenters Gabby Logan and Vinnie Jones, the preview gave audiences a glimpse as to what they could expect from ITV2, which in those early days, some would argue didn't amount to all that much.
And that is not a threat, that is a promise. And it don't take two to make it.
There was focus on the fact that ITV2 would re-air programmes seen on the recently christened ITV1 at a slightly later time, essentially serving the function of a timeshift channel before they even came into being some years later. A lot of the original programming around launch was strangely focused on current affairs, fronted by ITV personalities such as Katie Derham, John Suchet and Trevor McDonald. Drama series aimed at older viewers were also present here and there, a far cry from the kind of programming ITV2 shows nowadays. The initial audience reports were allegedly quite low for ITV2's launch, but given the landscape in which it did launch, you can't really blame it all that much. Given that it was a digital channel, to access it you had to be signed up to a digital provider, such as Sky or On Digital, or through a cable television provider. With the digital services only just beginning to launch themselves shortly prior to ITV2, the low audience ratings can be largely attributed to this factor alone. However, as with most new technology, adoption gradually picked up. Sky quickly became the market leader, with On Digital, later renamed to ITV Digital, collapsing in on itself and fading away in 2002. That same year, Freeview launched to the public, going on to become used by tens of millions of Brits as the main way to access and watch television, even to this day. For ITV2, despite what some would call a lackluster first few years, things really started changing and improving for it in the 2000s. With the introduction of ITV3 in 2004, a lot of the programming aimed at older viewers was shifted there, leaving ITV2 to be able to focus on the younger demographics. With an increase in budget also, it meant more original programming could be produced for the channel than before. For several years, ITV2 became the most viewed channel outside of the 5 main terrestrial broadcasters. That must have been quite the vindication for those at ITV who had spent decades trying to bring in ITV2 to the airwaves, only to see it now achieve such success in the 21st century. Nearly 30 years into its life, ITV2 still isn't truly for everybody. I wouldn't class myself as an avid or regular viewer of the channel, but equally, millions are quite the opposite. The shift to focus on content for teens and young adults has really worked wonders for ITV2. The reality programmes, especially in the last decade, have capitalised on that immensely. In this realm, it was able to, and still consistently, outperform its demographic rivals, that being BBC 3 and E4. No matter what your stance on it, ITV2 has gone on to truly make a name for itself, and after spending decades being kicked about in the long grass, or being teased to us every now and then, it may have arrived with a whimper rather than a bang, but I think it goes to show in this case, slow and steady truly won the race. Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Sean Knock, Dord Khan, Ethan Carberry-Holt, Liam Domain, AJ Mac 200017, Jen, Traffy, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Evan Hart 42 Radio, Tim Ripley, 40-something Manchild, John McLeod, James Wallace, Ben, Stephen Oliver, Shadow Fiend 180X, Swan Ronson, Adam Gamer, Sir Fonzie Daz, Tegan, Matthew Elif, Pigeon's House, Dave Batten, Leonard Starbuck, Kevin Mallon, Seed Diffusion, and Liam Turner, our AMTV staff members.